Greetings, brothers and sisters. Shalom, assalamu alaikum, adastana. Welcome back to Points of Light Radio. In this particular segment of Points of Light Radio, I'll be bringing you part of a much larger conversation I had with Robert Cooper. Now, if you recall, he's the former curator of the Grand Masonic Lodge of Scotland. And I'd love to have more conversations with him. He's a very busy man. He does a lot of, he's written quite extensively down through the years, but you've saw him here before talking about the free gardeners as well as the horseman's word and so on. And he was here to talk about the order of free Wrights. Right now, much like a lot of those incorporated trades and so on, the free Wrights was started in Scotland, right? And of course, they're now defunct. But he really broke down what that organization was about. So we're going to continue forward here. I'm going to finish what I'm doing, and let's take a look at the order of free Wrights. So before going any further, I'll give you a quick kind of insight on what I found about the free Wrights. Because unlike the free gardeners and the Freemasons, very little is known about the free Wrights. They were like the Masons at first. They only took, where the Masons would only take stonemasons, the free Wrights would only take Wrights or carpenters, shall we say, is what they really were. But they had a problem. The Wrights had a problem of, they just did not want to admit people who were not members of the incorporation, right? And the problem was that admission required an oath to be taken and the secrets of the trade communicated to a new member. Now, the Freemasons got around this by forming like lodges, separated from this, that were separate from the incorporation. From what I understand, the free Wrights did not want to do that, right? But eventually, the free Wrights did create lodges that were in every major town, right? But like I said, this is fascinating going forward. You'll find it very fascinating how this unfolded. So let's let Robert Cooper explain the rest to you. Mr. Cooper, welcome back to Points of Light Radio.
Yeah, good. Thanks very much for inviting me again, Stan. It's always a pleasure.
Been a while, though. Why don't you tell my listeners and viewers about yourself?
Oh, well, yes, I suppose I could do that. I'm now retired, but I used to work for the Grand Lodge of Scotland. I was the curator of the museum and library there for 30 years. I retired a couple of years ago. Trying to keep busy, still busy Masonically. Do quite a lot of writing still. I think I've had something like 14 books in total, either written or edited by me, all on Freemasonry in one shape or form. Mainly historical stuff. I'm a historian by training, if you like. So yeah, keeping busy. The thing that is keeping me very busy just now, Masonically, is we also have our own podcast called the Masonic Authors Guild International, or MAGI, and that's a friend of mine in Iowa, Mark Tabbert, who used to work for the George Washington National Masonic Memorial in Alexandria. And so the two of us have got together, and we do all sorts of things. We're mainly interested in the academic side of the study of Masonic history. So we're slowly but surely building an audience, mainly in the academic world. A lot of academics who have studied Freemasonry over the years, and it's something a lot of Freemasons don't know about. That you have got some very, very high-powered academic historians who have written and published about Freemasonry, but very few people are aware of their work. So we're bringing that kind of that dimension before Masons, mainly in the English-speaking world, I have to say at the moment. Although we have interviewed people from the likes of Brazil. So anyway, we'll maybe get you the link to the website and to the podcast, and you might find that interesting.
Oh, for sure. Now, one of the things I wanted to ask you about today is the free Wrights. Now, I understand they were an old sort of Masonic guilds, started out sort of like the Freemasonry, but they, as I understand, they faded out. Now, why don't you tell my listeners and viewers about what you know at least about the free Wrights? I understand they were carpenters instead of
I think the first thing is a kind of general comment. I mean, we know that there's lots of fraternities around, or maybe not so many now, but at one time there were a lot of fraternities around. And so, I mean, everybody, I suppose, is aware of things like the Odd Fellows, the Rechabites, the Good Templars, the Order of the Buffaloes, that all that kind of stuff. People are generally aware of their existence. The difference the point I want to make here is that Scotland, of course, is different, and the difference when it comes to fraternities is that unlike the Oddfellows, which are pure invention, fraternities in Scotland were nearly always grounded on ordinary working man's occupation. So that's why Freemasonry comes directly from working stonemasons, Scottish stonemasons. Other fraternities that are grounded on occupations, which are Scottish, are things like the Free Gardeners, which we've discussed before, Free Gardeners, the Free Fishermen, the Free Colliers, and the Free Wrights. We also have things like the Horsemen, the Carters, and one or two others that are even more obscure, and the Free Wrights. Now, all of these fraternities are originally Scottish, and they're based on the occupation. The Wrights, a Wright, as you've said, the Wright is a Wright is a Scottish word for a carpenter.
Oh.
Yeah, we rarely use the word Wright anymore, but that's the old Scottish term. So we know that they were in existence until relatively recently, up to around about the Second World War. And this is kind of sad fact, I have to say, that the First World War in particular changed so many things. For a start, it decimated the male population in most of the European countries anyway. And things never actually got back to normal. And the Wrights were another one that suffered for that reason. We do know, and this is again another important point, they didn't come from the guilds as such. Guilds in Scotland were called incorporations, and so you had two branches, if you like, and this applies to Freemasonry as well as the Wrights and other fraternities. You had a guild or incorporation, which was the kind of public face of the trade. So everybody knew about the incorporation of Wrights and Masons, that is, carpenters and stonemasons. Everybody knew about that because that was the public body that had jurisdiction over the actual occupation. So you couldn't work in a town as a carpenter or as a stonemason without belonging to an incorporation. So that was the kind of bureaucratic administrative body that looked after the trade of the Wrights or Masons or colliers or whatever. What the big difference, of course, is that unlike other parts of the world, the incorporation or the members of the incorporation also had a different separate organization that was secret, and that was the lodges. So there was two very distinct parts of the actual trade. One was the administrative bureaucratic body, and the other was the actual place where the trade secrets and esoteric knowledge was transmitted from one generation to the other. And that's the same for the stonemasons as for the Wrights or carpenters. So we know that they had lodges pretty much all over Scotland. The regalia is not dissimilar from the masons or the gardeners. You know, the aprons for protective purposes. They were the most distinctive one, and we still have some photographs showing them in their full regalia. So anyway, they operated quite successfully for a long time, up until the wars, basically. We also know that they spread to Europe. They were particularly active in Scandinavia, for example, where I'm told there are records of them. Excuse me, a bit hoarse. There are lodge records, but I haven't tracked those down yet. As always, the problem with these things is that they are kind of squirreled away in obscure archives, and it takes quite a lot of work to go and find the information. But we do know that they were around and about, certainly up till interwar years. Excuse me.
But like I understand, like for instance, there was also people like the groups like the Wobsters, were in other words they were weavers, and the Baxters, which were basically bakers. Now, did these groups, did they practice, like you say, esoteric knowledge? Would they have had a degree system as well?
Yeah, all of them did. The
Wow.
difference is that, yeah, I mean, the Wobsters and the Weavers, they were particularly active. The difference is that unlike the Wrights and the Masons, these organizations, the incorporations, that's where they transmitted their esoteric knowledge, because the incorporation of the Baxters, they all only Baxters were in the incorporation, so they were free to do what we do in lodges. The problem for the Wrights and Masons was that their incorporation included people who were not stonemasons, who were not Wrights, so they couldn't transmit their esoteric knowledge in the bounds of the incorporation, because there were cowards and eavesdroppers amongst them. So that's why they invented or created lodges that dealt with the esoteric side of the trade, whereas the other incorporations like Baxters, Weavers, bonnet makers, they made sure, and in some ways they were smarter than we were, they made sure that only members of that trade were members of the incorporation, which meant they didn't need lodges like we did, like the stonemasons did. So they were able to carry on with their esoteric knowledge in the knowledge that only members of that trade were members of the incorporation. That didn't apply to the Wrights and the Masons.
So, but like, where would the Wrights have developed like this? Do you think some of them maybe copied the Masons?
Yeah, I mean, we know, yes, I think that's absolutely right, Stan. We know, for example, the Free Gardeners did exactly that. They obviously were watching, from a distance. They saw what the Masons were doing, and why reinvent the wheel? So they just basically said, well, you tell us. I mean, I don't think there was any kind of animosity. I think they could easily have said, right, tell us what you're doing so we can just copy you, basically. And that's probably what they did. Why, as I say, why reinvent the wheel? Just, yeah, the Masons have got this system of lodges. We'll just do the same.
No, I've often, because I know in some cases the way when I've studied the Oddfellow structure, it sounded to me almost like maybe a former Freemason went down there and said, "Well, we don't have masonry down here, but you know what? I could probably a group of them probably got together and said, well, we could set something else up." And I've often wondered about that because I've often said we have these we have these signs and tokens and grips and so on to protect outsiders in many cases from coming in and copying it, but oftentimes the members were the biggest perpetrators of imitation. I mean, they would they would start other works up for the, especially in the States. You saw this where went over there and they started all kinds of different fraternal orders based around the structure of Freemasonry. Put it that way.
Yeah, I think that's right. It's the structure they copied, not the esoteric knowledge, not the ritual. We again, the best example is the Free Gardeners, where the structure is almost identical to Freemasonry. The regalia is fairly similar. But when you get down to the nitty gritty of the ritual, it's quite different. Although a Freemason would find it similar, but it is definitely distinctively different.
Yeah, they put their own little twist on it.
That's right. So, all these, they copied the structure of Freemasonry. They just changed the content, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Very, very true. Now, have you written any new books lately? Or are you in the process, or?
Yeah, I'm always scribbling around on different things. The last book, I think, as you know, was a book on the history of the Free Gardeners. That took quite a long time, actually, quite a bit of travelling, and I thought, right, I'm going to have a little bit of time out now. So I've been writing short stories. What your listeners might be interested in is that I've got a series of on these podcasts of Cooper on the Case, as it's called, where I am supposedly a detective investigating Masonic issues.
Okay.
Perhaps we should investigate the French situation, find out what exactly is going on. So, so I'm having a bit of fun with that. And I've been writing a bit about people like John Steinbeck, for example, who I didn't realize was a Mason until I wandered into the Steinbeck Museum in California. So there's always things to find out about Freemasonry. Always. It's such a big organization. It's been going for so long. I suppose what I'm doing, I'm concentrating on at the moment, is I'm looking very closely at the earliest rituals, the earliest Masonic rituals, mainly because I think the esoteric content of the original esoteric content has been obscured. Some of it's been removed. Some of it's been buried under layers of other later stuff. But the original esoteric content of the first rituals, I find fascinating because it's written in such a way that it's written in a kind of code where it disguises the actual meaning. And when you read these rituals, most people will have an immediate problem because it's written in what we call Middle Scots, which isn't English. It's a language on its own. So trying to trying to understand Scots from more than 300 years ago has been a bit of a problem. In fact, I ended up going to night school to learn how to translate Scots, Middle Scots into modern English, and that's been a fascinating journey. Not a hugely long journey, but I think we now have a much better understanding of what the Masons of 300, 400 years ago were actually thinking, and they incorporated that in their ritual. So I've been doing a lot of that, which is a lot of kind of mind games rather than actually doing anything, just simply trying to work out what these really obscure words mean. So, for instance, this is not in the ritual as such, but the word cowan is a very old Scottish word. So trying to go all the way back to where the word originally came from, and what it originally meant, and what it changed into meaning, has been fascinating as well. So you get it's a bit like what's the old adage about how many angels can dance on the head of a pin, sort of stuff. But it is interesting nonetheless. So.
Well, like you went back to school, so we're never too old to learn, I guess, eh?
Oh, you're right. You're absolutely right. And of course, even the handwriting in those days was different. Trying to separate, the letters in a word so that you can actually make sense of how the word was spelled has been a bit of an adventure. And then, of course, once you've read, one handwritten ritual, and then you move to the next one, of course, it's written by somebody else who's got a completely different style of writing. So you're back to square one. You got to, oh no, why couldn't they all just write the same?
That's wonderful. Well, Mr. Cooper, I appreciate you getting up early to talk to us today. All the best to you, and all the best to your podcast. And thanks for sharing some of this history with us today, sir.
Sure, my pleasure.
That was Robert Cooper, brothers and sisters. It's always wonderful having him here. It really is. I learn so much. Now, and the other thing is, I'm always fascinated when he starts explaining things about the differences between Scottish fraternalism and fraternalism in the rest of the United Kingdom. There's no way around it. Fraternalism really did develop local characteristics. Now, one of the big things I get from this conversation is the history of these organizations and how it kind of meshes with the affairs of the time, right? He talks about the First and Second World War hitting these lodges hard, right? Because men served and died in World War II, and they were primarily who was in these lodges. And these lodges suffered. I do know here in Canada, particularly in the case of, for instance, the Orange Lodge. The Orange Lodge was affected very heavily by the First and Second World War, particularly that First World War, because being the first war of its kind, a lot of these members of the Orange Order who considered themselves loyal British subjects, shall we say, wanted to go fight for the crown, and they did just that, and many of them never returned, right? So it did hit, I know, the Orange Order very, very hard, right? War is really an awful thing that way, right? But, it was interesting how he talked about some of these other orders that existed at the time as well. We never hear about these things, right? And I love the fact that he's out there really, digging through these old manuscripts and so on and finding this information, because the case in the Free Wrights and some of the others you heard him mention today, much of the history has been lost over time, or wasn't written down at all, or we're still in that process of looking for it. I honestly believe that, Mr. Cooper is doing fraternalism a great service, by going hunting for this information and cataloging it. I really do. Right. And I love it. Almost like my brother there, my brother, Owen Snowden, him going through writing these books about Buffaloism on the Tide, retracing history. I love this. This is what, like I said, fraternalism owes these men a real debt of gratitude. And I'll leave it there. Before I go, as usual, I want to draw your attention to the PayPal link in the details section of this segment. You can hit on that, make a voluntary donation to Points of Light Radio. We will use that to move the podcast forward. You can see the link to my Facebook page at facebook.com/Points of Light Radio. My X handle is at PO Light Radio. My Bluesky handle is at polightradio.bsky.social. You can see the link to my Spotify channel, as well as my Points of Light Radio store. Brothers and sisters, it's been a pleasure bringing you this segment. And until we meet again, just step into the light.